Thank you so much for coming here for the Hack Talk during the Technical AI Safety Startups Hackathon. We have the pleasure of inviting Lukas here. Lukas has been in the recent YC cohort and received a bunch of funding for the startup vectorview that has worked on evaluations historically. He's here today to also chat a bit about his experience and what it's like really building AI safety in YC in this case. So take it away, Lukas, and excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, like Espen said in the intro, I will talk about AI safety as a startup and my experiences in YC. So to start off, more generally, I think that AI safety is a problem, and in general, people pay to solve their problems. This should allow you to make a startup around this. My personal view is that there is a non-zero chance that we will, or probability that we will have some very big problems with the default option or the default outcome of AI safety or of the AI progress. And even though the probabilities might be very low, since the stakes are so enormous, this is something we need to work on. And I think also because of this view is becoming kind of mainstream, because a lot of regulations are happening and a bunch of high-profile researchers are moving or leaving their companies because of AI safety. I think this is a good time to start a company around it. But why should you solve these problems as a startup? Why not as a researcher or some other setup? I think one of the main problems with AI safety as a startup, or it's not a problem, but it's that the problems are not very dire at the moment. So people assume that this is not something I can work on because no one will pay me at the moment. But this is what VCs exist to allow. They allow you to take big bets on things that will be problematic in the future. If you can convince them that no one will buy this now, but they will buy them for a lot of money in 2 or 1 year, then they will pay you to develop this technology before even someone pays for it. Another point here is that I think builders and entrepreneurs are very underrepresented in the AI safety community. And this should make the available options of things to work on much bigger. And if you are someone that is a good builder and could go into AI safety, but you think it's more tempting to go to a big AI lab and work there, I think one thing you should ask yourself is what is the counterfactual impact here? If you don't go to an AI lab, then someone else will do that work, and the total impact on the world might be less. But if you do a startup, that wouldn't have happened if you didn't do it. And I think the best people, they do stuff that wouldn't happen if they didn't do it. So you're motivated to do a startup with AI safety. How do you do it? Well, there's many ways. I took the path of Y Combinator, YC, which is a startup accelerator. There's many others that are basically similar. What they all are they are a bunch of events, they are advice, they're a bunch of money, and you get a great network. You don't need any of these, but it's a great starting point. And for me, in my experience, I got there and I met some incredible people. The talent density of the cohort is unmatched in my experience. And it was very, very, very inspiring to meet so many people working on super ambitious ideas and realizing that these people are incredible. They are very smart. They're working on incredible things, but I am too. And I could do more ambitious things because I see that they are. So in that way, it kind of changed my life. So yeah, YC is great, but it's not necessary. There's other paths as well. YC is famous for some very basic advice that people still they feel very, very basic and kind of dumb. But people fail on these points over and over again. So they have become very famous because they are very useful still. And this is, for example, make something that people want. It sounds super basic, but the number one problem with startups in general is that they have an idea in their head of something that they think would be cool, but it turns out that no one wants it after they have built it. And that's so, yeah. make something that people want. You should launch early and iterate if your product allows for that. But like in general, if you launch and you are not ashamed of what you're launching, then you should probably have launched earlier. Another piece of advice is do things that don't scale. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but basically doing things that don't scale is like, don't waste time on processes that will change in the future. And also, by doing these processes manually, you will learn so much about the processes that when you do finally build them, you will make them much, much more like robust. You should talk to your users. It sounds obvious, but people talk to their users in the beginning, but then they stop, and you should not stop. You should like continuously talk to your users and make sure that they like what you're building. It's better to have, on the same note, it's better to have 100 passionate users than like 1 million average users, because the 100 passionate users will give you feedback and the million users won't. So then they will give you feedback to build a better product, which you can scale up in the end to something that is very big, that 1 million people are passionate about. And finally, like, you should love your customer, because hopefully you will spend a lot of time with them. You will need to put yourself in their shoes and relate to them. Otherwise, you will probably fail at building what they value. So those are like some famous advice that YC gives. And now I want to talk to them in the context of AI safety. So in AI safety, many of the problems are far in the future. No one will pay for them at the moment. There are some, of course, at the moment, like misinformation is already starting to become a problem with AI on the internet. But most problems, like GPT-4, is not capable of killing us all at the moment. So in the future, there's sub-problems of this like big existential problem of AI safety that will be very, very important. And like I said, venture capital exists to do this. But this, like, one big problem with this is that you can't really follow the YC advice on like iterate on user feedback and how do I know that I made something people like, because like I made it and it's like 1 year until someone actually wants it. So that is kind of hard, but yeah, I don't have a great answer here, but like you have to be aware that that's a problem in many of the AI safety startup ideas that people have today. It's also like, because this problem appear in the future, the market is very like uncertain, and that means that you definitely should not do things that scale, because these processes that you spend so much time building now will probably change because the market is so unnecessary. So do things that don't scale is even more applicable in AI safety ideas. Also, in general, in AI safety ideas, like this is like, take this with the note that this might not apply to all AI safety ideas, but like in general, the ones that I have seen have smaller customer pools. So for example, at my startup, we do evaluations for like the big AI labs. That's a customer pool of 5 or maybe 10. It's not huge. This is not fine. You can like tell yourself, but okay, this is fine because we have 100, or in my case 10 passionate users, which is like better than 1 million average users. But this is not really what this advice is saying, because like this advice tells you that you need to start at 100 passionate users and then you can like scale that up to 1 million users. So this is not still a problem that that the small customer pool, the small customer pool is still a problem. But what this means is that you need to charge more, and this is another advice by YC, that generally you should like charge way more than you think that you should charge, and this could be very, very not comfortable to do. But in general, if you're solving someone's problem, if you like say something that is way out of their budget, they will not say, okay, then I don't want this, and then leave. They will say, okay, I want this, so how about, and then you have the negotiation. So I don't think you should fear charging too much, or at least trying to charge too much. And lastly, love your customers. In my case, this is pretty easy because like we're working with the researcher at the AI labs, and I think those are the kind of people that I like hanging around with. But in general, you should like think about like, okay, this idea, who is the customer here? Is it researchers, government, enterprise, consumer? And then think about like, would I want to like spend a lot of time with these people? Would I be able to relate to them in a way that I can actually solve their problems? So, and this applies generally, but like also with AI safety. One big part of doing a startup is finding clients. And this can be very hard, but it's like maybe the first hard thing that you do. So some ways of doing that is like warm intros, going to events, or cold emailing. I think warm intros is the best one. And like to engage in like networks of other founders, the YC network is very strong. So I can recommend applying to YC if you are interested. And the AI safety community is very like altruistic. So they also generally people in these communities want to help you. So if they know someone that might be a good client for you, then they can like intro you. So they say like, hi, they write an email and said like, hi, you should talk to this person. It's my friend, blah, blah. And then you can meet up. The conversion of those kind of emails, warm intros, is much higher than cold emailing, for example. Many AI safety startup ideas are high effort, low volume. Like I said, like because the like customer pool is often quite small, you have to make sure like you don't have a million potential customers. So then you have to make a high effort of converting the small amount of people that do exist. And events are a great example. Like it takes a lot of effort and money to go to some conference or something like that. But it's worth it if you can actually start to chat with people and becoming friends with them, because then they might buy from you. And lastly, like if none of the above works, cold emailing is not fun, but you have to do it. And here I would like caution you to first identify if your product is like a high volume, low conversion, or a low volume, high conversion type of situation, because the emails that you write are very different in these scenarios. How much like personalization you should do and stuff like this. I don't want to go through every single point and like guide you to how to write your emails, because there's like 1,000 guides out there. So read them before you go out and spam people. And it's okay to be annoying. That's the only one I want to ask, like, or like add. It feels like when they haven't answered you and you have sent them like 3 emails, then okay, I should stop. But like generally, I would still ping them until they tell you to stop. And when they tell you to stop, then yes, you should stop. But before that, feel free to continue pinging them. So I want to end on some discussion on like doing good. Often people that have AI safety startup ideas, they come from a very altruistic perspective, and want to do like impact in the world, not only make a bunch of money. And I've had some thought about this. For example, I think impact is like not only the intentions that you have, but also like how big the magnitude of your like projects that you do in the world. So impact is like magnitude times direction, and I think in general a lot of people find it easier to do one of these, and then they only focus on one. So some people might like disregard completely the direction and only do like some startup that makes a lot of money, and then they disregard the direction, and then they didn't have that much impact in the world. And then there's other people who like, I don't really know how to make something super high impact, where the magnitude is high, but I know that this research direction, for example, is very like pure, and there's no way of doing anything bad here. And I would just like ask yourself if you're taking the easy way out, like focusing on one because you find that easier, and maybe focusing on both might be something that you should do to have more impact in the world. And one maybe hot take here is that I think more people should focus on the magnitude direction. This is maybe a bit controversial, but I think Elon Musk still is having a direction that is net positive, and his magnitude is enormous. So in that way, he's very, very good for the world. I also think there's like a conversation to be had if Microsoft or the Gates Foundation is what has had the most positive impact to the world. Obviously, the direction is much more pure and good for the Gates Foundation, but the magnitude could be argued that it's so much bigger at Microsoft that actually Microsoft have been more good for the world than the Gates Foundation. I'm not claiming that this is true. I'm just like, this is things are like examples of things that could be true, and if they are an interesting thought experiment on how you should like go about doing your impact on the world. And the final one is like, altruism did not bring phones to poor countries. Like people that wanted to like maximize profit for the rich people did in a way, but then just like that trickled down. So I think like, yeah, and sometimes when you do startups, it can feel like I'm just like I sold out. I wanted to do AI safety, and I wanted to like solve. I'm an effective altruism, and I wanted to solve this like very big problem. And now I'm doing like a startup, and we're making money, and I've sold out. But I think you should look at like people like this and say that they still had a positive impact on the world. And even though the direction wasn't as clear cut positive, I think if you can like have a big magnitude, you have a great impact on the world still, as long as your direction is at least positive. But like that is big if. Like there's some people that have like a negative direction, and then like having big magnitude is just bad. But yeah, that's something I've thought about at least. And then lastly, non-profit versus for-profit. So startups are generally for-profit, but a lot of people working in this space are non-profits. And from what I've seen, there's like cases for both. For non-profits, I think it's way easier to stay on a good path. You have funding from people that gave you money to do something purely good, and there's no like market pressures, nothing like that. And it's also very easy, or like much easier to attract altruistic talent. So people that have the interest that you have and want to like do good for the world often want to work at nonprofit. So the caution is that maybe I'm not an expert here, but I think generally it's harder to get like a lot of funding if your project requires that. But it's not like necessarily true that your project does require that. But I think the funding might have like a much lower ceiling in the nonprofit case. And in the for-profit case, I think the potential for a big magnitude is much greater. It's easier to attract like non-safety pilled people, and they can still, even though they are like not, their heart maybe is not with AI safety, if you like give them tasks that are aligned with AI safety, they have still contributed. And I think if you have a lot of money, you can hire a bunch of people like this who wouldn't do safety work otherwise. And with for-profit, you always have the backup of earn to give. If you start a startup and you have the good intentions, your direction is positive, but then the market pressures and investors and a bunch of other pressures put you off track, you should try to avoid that. But like if it comes to that, at least you made a lot of money, which you can give to charity. And but the caution here, like I said, you should be honest with investors, but then don't give them too much influence. So be honest with your intentions, that I'm doing this partly because of positive impact to the world. And then when you have been honest with them, then they can't complain when you maybe do some choices that are not directly in the short term maximizing profit, and instead doing something good for the world. So I think that was all of my talk. Thanks for listening.
Nice, amazing. Thank you so much for the talk, Lucas. And I'm sure everyone here is super inspired now to go ahead and think a little bit about how their ideas can maybe make it into the real world as well. Also interesting to hear about YC. There are notes in the chat as well from everything Lucas has mentioned, if you want to look through some of it. Otherwise, I'm curious to hear if there are any questions from our audience here today. Otherwise, I might also ask the first pieces of questions, of course. I'm curious, with vectorview specifically, how do you look at this? So you mentioned this for-profit case for doing big magnitude problem solving in AI safety. How have you seen that pan out with vectorview, and what's the specific sorts of what have been the biggest challenges? What are your current challenges in terms of making sure that it has the impact you want and doesn't turn into the back out plan in that sense?
Yeah, I think like we're still early stage, and like looking to find our footing. I think in terms of what are the biggest challenges, in the beginning it was like finding clients, but as you get like one foot in the door, then people start to trust you more and more. So I think like if you're in the stage where like, oh, I'm finding no clients, I think like don't be discouraged by this, because like once you get the foot in the door at one place, then that will trickle down to, or like there's a snowball effect there. For us now, it's just like finding great people, and because like we have, I guess, more demand than what we can output. But this is also quite important point, that you want to have your cultural in line with your values, and this is like especially hard. It's like finding, like I said, like builders, like my opinion, where like builders are underrepresented in AI safety, comes from the fact that I've been trying to find people. We're looking for engineers, but it's like there's not that many, and I guess the ones that do exist, they get poached by the big labs with a much bigger salary. So I think that's one of the problems that we have been having.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it's also a big question for Anthropic, even though they can lure you in with all the money. Their last round, as far as I understand, is a like culture fit round. But they don't ask specifically about safety there, but exactly ask sort of about like, oh, what was the most altruistic action you took, and what's the sort of like, I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but it's something along the lines that are like more generalizable than just AI safety focus. Phil, do you wanna jump up on the stage as well to ask your question?
Sure, yeah. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, thanks a lot for all the insights and tips. I wanted to ask about one particular point, namely the two things that don't scale one. So maybe can you give one concrete example to make it a bit more clear? It's still not 100% clear, what are things that actually don't scale. So is this meant in terms of product or in terms of business process? Maybe you can illustrate.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above is the answer. And I think like having one example, I think, so I think, okay, so I might be wrong on the very specifics here, but it doesn't really matter. But I think the example comes from Airbnb. And in the beginning, they didn't have, this might be wrong, but it doesn't matter. The point still stands. In the beginning, they didn't have a process to like automatically add people. Well, let me give you a more concrete example of my friend. My friend made a chatbot before the OpenAI API was available. And the way that he did that was that he had ChatGPT, or like the OpenAI API was available, but not the GPT 3.5. So a worse version was available as an API, which was not good enough. So he sat at home when he got like from his app, a user asked the question. He copy pasted that into ChatGPT and then took the answer and like pasted it back to the chat. That is not scalable. If he gets like 1 million users, then this is not going to work. But like before the API was available, then this worked because he only had like 10 users. And he learned so much about what his user was using the app for. I mean, there could be like privacy concerns here, but like apart from that, like the example highlights how you can like learn a lot from what your user are doing in your app. And also he didn't have to build the entire like pipeline for, I mean, what he could have done, I guess, is to have like some scraper that like inputs it automatically in the website and do stuff like this. But he knew that the API is coming in like 2 weeks or something. So he didn't do that because he knew he had to change. And I think in like once you start to think about this, there's like a great Paul Graham essay about this if you want to know more about it. But it's like once you get this like phrase in your mind, do things that don't scale, there's so many instances where you like sit and like, oh, now I'm doing things that scale. Should I really be doing this? And then you ask yourself that question. And then sometimes it is worth it, but like often when you're early stage, it's not worth it. And then you stop yourself.
So is it also about timing? It sounded now a bit like, at some point these things will scale, but you have to do them at the time when they don't already scale.
Yes.
Because then you
So,
actually get the experience first and you really understand what's going on. And then you are in a better position to scale when everyone else is starting to scale, but they don't have this deep knowledge,
Yeah, that is key. It's only in the beginning.
Yeah, I don't imagine that's scalable unless you are Amazon and can just hire enough Indian like annotation labor to make your shops work there or whatever they were doing.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Phil. Ashish also has a question. I've invited you to the stage too.
Yes. Hi.
Hey.
Hi. My question is related to particularly evals. Now that we see that there's a lot of sort of demand for evals and people willing to fund to generate good evaluations, even from Anthropic, and you were in the same space, Lukas. So how do you see that panning out in the future? In the sense that there's multiple players, there will be the government, the regulatory authorities, there's a need for third-party regulators. There's Anthropic or other big players who are at the forefront of AI safety. And then there's startups like yours and others which are particularly focused on UL. So how do you see that ecosystem evolve in the future?
Yeah. I think the labs will always want their eval. They will want to have evals internally, which they can run before they give something away to auditors. So I think there will always be like a demand for evals within the labs. I think there will be some kind of third-party auditing like organization, because I think they will be scared that like if we don't like self-regulate here, I'm not an expert on governance, so like you should take my comments on this with a grain of salt, but like I think they will think that if they are forced to be regulated, then that regulation will be much like tougher than if we like self-regulate now. And if there's like a third-party auditing organization that takes that role, I think that could work. However, we have seen like for now, there's not been that many success stories where people try to do that. The labs usually have their like pre-release things quite tightly for themselves. Governments, I think we saw that OpenAI now has some like just recently started to say that they will give their models pre-release to the governments. So that might be like instead of this third-party auditing external org, that the governments take this role. I am not smart enough to understand the pros and cons of having it as a separate organization or as a government organization. But I think something like this will happen. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Ashish. We also have Artie, who I have also invited to the stage.
Oh yeah, thank you. Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yep.
Oh yeah, thank you. So first of all, I have two questions. First one is like, uh, regarding your product, how many clients have been like willing and like very excited to hear that you're doing this eval thing? And like what value proposition do you give them? Like if you eval this, then you will gain this sort of value or profit or something. So that's the first one. And the second one is, how do you think the market is for like data annotation thing? Because now we see that there are many companies doing that, like Scale AI, also Data Store AI, the other stuff. But I think when we get to like agent, like AI agents, I think the data annotation problem would be so much higher, and I think it opens up like space for other companies to come in, startups. Yeah, I think that's for me. Thank you.
Yeah. On your first point, I would say that we are in this category of low volume, high effort sales. So we haven't like talked to thousands of customers and try to sell them. Like we have been very selective, trying to only sell to the people that are building models. And the value proposition is basically you say that you care about safety, so then pay for it, or not really like that, but yeah, they want to yeah, like they would otherwise do this in house, so like they will pay money for this regardless if it's like a third party or if they do it in house, because they do have significant like safety researchers in house. So yeah, that's on that front. Like I'm not an expert on data labeling, the data labeling market. I wouldn't comment there. But I think you're right that that is like a new avenue, and I think in general, like post training techniques will be very valuable secrets within these labs, or it is already. If you, for example, look at like the Llama 3 paper now, they have like one section where they're like, we have these 7 capabilities that we want to improve. So for example, like math and reasoning, or like multilingual, or some coding and capabilities like that. And then for each, they have some like hacky way of creating synthetic data or some kind of data set to post train for that specific capability. And I think like the labs like Anthropic and OpenAI, they probably have something like even more sophisticated than what the Llama 3 paper was talking about. And part of that is probably something like you said, that you need to label agentic data in some way. But I wouldn't know what exactly the problem there is.
Yeah, and I guess I would imagine, based on recent changes in the research space as well, that we'll see companies much more doing the data annotation in-house, because it like the data quality is such an important differentiator, it seems, compared to doing like this at scale, for example, which Scale AI have done and other data annotation platforms. So
Yep.
nice. We'll take one last question from Ashish, and thank you so much for the good questions, Artie.
Yes, hi again.
Thanks.
Hey, we are for this hackathon. I'm also working with my teammates on sort of building safety evals. So I wanted to sort of ask you if you can share like the broad idea, or maybe the broad idea that goes on in like that you're working on, without sharing in secrets, of course, or maybe the future of how you see like the technical side of evaluations being.
Yeah.
You're of course also
Uh,
welcome to share all your secrets.
Yeah. No, I think I assume. Are you familiar with Meter?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think like the distributional shift from what they are doing is that significant to what we are doing. So like if you have a good sense of what they are doing, I think that's the kind of stuff that we are doing as well. And yeah, I think that it's just like I couldn't tell you anything that is more useful than yeah, look what Meter is doing. Okay.
Thank you.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lukas, for these great thoughts. And you'll, of course, be able to re-listen and re-look at the talk online on our YouTube channel as well. But until then, hack away and make sure to do some awesome projects here. And then we'll be excited to check them out and see if maybe that's the next vectorview, the TensorView coming out of this hackathon. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Cool.